Another data type that we want to look at is the var data type. If you look at it, the var type is a generic property type that can refer to any data type. So basically what you can do, you can also use a var to store this integer. You can use a var to store a Boolean data type. You can use a var to store any value, and it's going to work. It is very useful when you don't know the data type that you are dealing with. So to play with it, I am going to copy these examples here in the documentation and play with them in our code. Okay, so I'm going to copy this. This is the beauty of working with Qt Creator. There are tons and tons of pieces of code you can copy and use in your application. And this is not a bad thing. If you wonder how I align this thing, I just hit Control A, Control I to have these things aligned. And if you see here, you see that there are warnings telling us that we should use specific data types instead of using the var data type here. Okay, it says you should use enter real instead of var, ball instead of var, string instead of var. But you can see that var can store integers, booleans, strings. You can see that we can define our own string using this JavaScript constructor. We can define colors. We are going to play with these variables and try to output some information about them. We're going to start with this number here and show you that you can output it just like you did for these numbers here. So let's do that. We're going to console log. Let's separate things a little bit. So we're going to say console log, the value of, what is it called again? Let's look, a number is a number. And if we run this, we should see the value that is stored here, which is 100. 100 here. We can do the same thing for ball, string, and this string here. So I'm going to do this and come back and show you these things running. Okay, I went ahead and typed these things to save you some time. We're going to output the Boolean data type, string, and another string that we initialized using the constructor here. Let's run the application. You see the ball is false. The value of a string is hello world, which is here, and the other string is this thing here, and you see that we output it without a problem. Var can also be used to store other more complex data types, for example, a color. So this is a color, for example, and we are storing it as a var. You can see that they are giving us a warning that we should use the color data type instead of var, but var can store this too, so it is possible to use it if you need to use it this way. To show you that you can use this color, we're going to use it to set the background of this rectangle here. So we can take out this yellow here and say a color, and it's going to work. Let's run the application. We are going to see this color. This is the color. Okay, we can change it again. We can play with these numbers. What this is really doing, it is changing the components of the color. This is the red component, this is the green component, this is the blue component, and this is the opacity. You can look at the documentation for the color QML type to have more information about this. Let's turn the others to 0. Make the opacity a 1 to make it completely opaque, and make it completely red. Run the application. We should have a red background on our text here, which is what we have. Okay, so let's turn it back because this red is really annoying. There's another data type that is called rect that you use to represent rectangles. Let's go back to the doc and show you this thing. Rect. The rect type refers to a value with x, y, width, and height. It really represents a rectangle. So to show you the properties inside this thing, I'm going to output these components. Okay, so let's go back to our onCompleted method here and say console log a rect height. Okay, you can access these things. think this is correct. And let's change the values to not make it completely a square. So let's change this to 17, change this to 56, change this to 46, change this to, lift this to a 10, no problem. Let's run the application. This is X, this is Y, this is the width, this is the height. Okay, and you can see that X is 17, Y is 56, width is 46, and height is 10, which is what we specify. You can access these values. There's another data type that is called point. Let's go to the documentation and see what it is about. Okay, it refers to a value with X and Y attributes. You can use it to store pairs of data, with one being X and the other being Y. I'm not going to show you how to output these things because it really is the same. So size is another data type that refers to value with width and height. And if you look at this, you can see that rectangle really groups point and size into one thing. These are some other data types you can use. You can check them out if you are interested. But for now, we are going to play with this array data type and this function here. If you look at this array, it is storing different data types. These are integers. These are strings. Okay, if you look here, this is a function. You can do these things in JavaScript. If you have been programming in languages like C, C++, or Java, you're going to find this a little bit weird because usually you don't put different data types in arrays, but you can do this in JavaScript. So what we're going to do, we're going to play with this array. For example, we can output its length. If you look at its contents, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements in the array. So if we want to output that, we can do something like console log the length of the array is, what is it called again? I forgot. An array. So let's do that. And you can see that you can output its length. Let's run the application. The length is 6. We have 6 elements in the array. What if you want to output these elements in the array? What you can do is loop through all these elements and output them. The way you do that, this is really JavaScript knowledge. So if you find this a little bit confusing, you should consider looking at some JavaScript tutorial to get these basics. But if you have some programming experience, this is really nothing new. What you can do is say an array, okay, and say for each, and inside pass in a callback function. So the way you do that, you say function and you say value. This is going to be the value that you are working on. So we put this on a separate line. And what we can do inside, we can output this value here. So what this is doing is really looping through the array, and at each iteration, it is storing the value of the element we are at in the array in this variable here called value. So we can output it to prove our case. Let's do console log value, just to show you that we are retrieving the values in the array. If we run the application, we should see them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we have function here. What the heck is this? We are seeing function here because the last element in the array is a function. If we wanted this function to print the returned value here, which is 6, we would need to call this as a function. And the way we could do that is to also pass in the index as a second parameter in our function, and say f index equals 5, console log value, and call this as a function. If it's not equal to 5, we're going to do the usual thing we've done before, console log value. I know this might sound cryptic for people who are not familiar with JavaScript, But if you take some tutorial or some course on JavaScript, this is going to make sense. We are actually checking to see if we are dealing with this value here. If we are dealing with this value here, we call it as a function. Notice this set of parentheses we put here. And if it's another element, we just output it. So if we run again, we should see the output as expected, 1 through 6, and you see that 6 is output here. This is one way to output the element of the array that you have. If you don't like this notation, we can use a regular for loop that you also have in other programming languages. I also take this chance to show you that you can do comments in QML. Okay, this is a multiple lines comment. You can also do comments like this. For example, if you want to comment this line, you can use these 2 slashes like this to comment it out. Okay, it's not going to be processed when this application is being compiled. So we comment this out and we can say for var I equals 0, I less than the length of the array. So we're going to say an array length and increment this thing. And if we are at index 5, we are going to retrieve the current item. This is how you retrieve it. You put in the name of the array, you got these square brackets, and inside you put the index. And you call this as a function also by putting parentheses like we did on top here. And if we are not dealing with the index number 5, we just do the normal thing and output the array element at this index. If we run the application, we are going to see the same thing. Okay, 1 through 6. You can use whatever notation you see fit. Many people are going to like this one because it is familiar, but this can come in handy and be very easy to understand if you start getting familiar with JavaScript. I currently like to use this one. Okay, by now we have seen multiple uses for the var data type, but there are 2 other data types that I want you to see. One is the font data type that you use to store font information for your text. So if you want to know more about the font data type, you can come to the documentation and search for font. It's this easy. If you go down, you're going to find the font QML data type, and you can see all the information about it and the properties that you can set to it. And if you want to set this font as your font in the text, you can do that very easily. You can comment this out, for example, and say font, a font. Let's run again. You see that the font has changed. This is the font that we have defined here that we are using. Okay, you can specify the font family, its size, whether or not it's bold. For example, if we change this to false and run again, it's not going to be bold again. Okay, you've seen this. Another property that you can use in QML is the date property. You use it when you are dealing with time information, and you can specify a date like this. Okay, for example, if we go in the onCompleted method of ours here, we can say console log mdate. Let's run and see what we're going to see. You see that it shows full information of the date in my locale here. Okay, it's in Chinese because my locale is in Chinese right now. But what I want to show you is that you can call all kind of methods on this date object. For example, you can get date, get day, get full year. These are methods that are documented in the date object in the JavaScript documentation. I am going to talk fully about the way you use JavaScript in your code when I talk about JavaScript integration with QML. But right now, I just want you to get a hang of what is available and how you can use it. And it really is impossible to talk about QML without using JavaScript. It's just going to be dull. You need to see some JavaScript, even if we haven't got to talk about JavaScript in QML yet. The last thing we're going to see is this function here. You can actually assign a function to a variable and call it as a function. So what we can do is go down here and say console log and call it. Okay, we're going to say a function and call it like this. If you don't put the parentheses, you're going to see the same thing we saw when we called the last element of the array, which was a function. You're going to see that it is a function, but it's not going to show you the value. So you need to put these parentheses to actually get the function to do what it's meant to do. Let's run the application again, and you're going to see that the function value is 1, which is what is being returned here. For example, if you return 7 and run again, it's going to say the function value is 7. And take care to see this syntax here. It might be cryptic to some people, but it is just a way to put these things on one line, and it makes things a little bit easier to see. For now, this covers all we set out to do in this lecture. I hope you now have a pretty good idea of the data types that are available for you to work with in QML, and how you can use some of these data types to affect the code and make things a little bit neater. In the next lecture, we are going to explore a very strong concept in QML, which is property binding. I'll see you in the next lecture.